It's coming. We're pacing.
Good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order at 9:30. This is our October 31st, 2023 regular meeting. So we will start today with the territorial acknowledgement. And before I do that, I will acknowledge this is a hybrid meeting. We have Hugh, Skylar, Peter, and Debbie joining us online this morning. So welcome. We'll make sure that we look for your hands up. Welcome everybody else that's here and in person. We'll begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is a traditional territory of the Adirondack, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, with long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, United Nations of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nations, and Moravian Town. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. We value the significant historical and contemporary contribution of local and regional First Nations and all the original peoples of Turtle Island. On to number 2, we will modifications to the agenda. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, I will ask if there's any declarations of any pecuniary interest. Not that either. We will now move on to administrative business, and that's the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a mover for the minutes of September 26th? Oh, we have Peter, and we'll take George. Discussion? Favor? Opposed? That is carried. Business arising from the minutes, correspondence, and reports for consideration. We will move right into the draft budget discussion. And to start us off, I will hand it over to Tracy.
Okay, thank you. To help in this discussion, actually Teresa's managed to off a number of the budget packages, so I thought it'd be handy to have it in paper. Review that probably didn't print it out online, so we'll have Brent and Teresa provide those. And also, when you came in this morning, you would have received the 2024 budget overview. Again, trying to provide a little bit of a snapshot what the budget drivers are and some of the impacts to our budget. A bit of a budget presentation just to highlight some of the changes that we're seeing this year, and we'll introduce the report I have. So there's been lots of effort put into this budget. As you can imagine, this year, separating out our programs and services in 3 different categories, it's a bit challenging. Significant effort as well as we transition to a new budgeting software. We started using Questica about this time last year, late November, for first training sessions, and it's been a great tool. We've been populating that tool with information for us to have better information at our fingertips to make these decisions. This is the first time pulling that information together and producing a budget report out of that. So a significant effort by Christine Saracino to learn the programs, learn the how to create reports so that we get them in the format that we see today. A lot of background effort required to do so, and it will set us up very well for future budgets. But again, want to make sure that everyone's aware of some of the changes that drive our budgets today. Screen, perfect. So with that overview, again, this budget is prepared by all the managers, and they're here if there's any questions that you have. But a few things that I just wanted to highlight. I always like to remind everyone that we are still about a watershed, although we have had to separate out what we do on the landscape in different categories. It really is about the programs and services that we provide that respect our long-standing goals for environmental protection. Again, this is a watershed-based approach. We've always taken the approach that we want to leverage that municipal investment. Where I think we do a great job of that. We enter into different partnerships and then provide that return on investments when we deliver those programs that benefit the entire watershed. Again, that watershed approach, we always know that anything that we're doing and those activities that occur upstream affect those downstream landowners too. Next slide. So a little bit of an overview here, just to highlight some of the budget drivers. The impacts on the budget really kind of fall into a few different things under legislative changes, historical context and how we got to where we are today, and then those operational drivers as well. Certainly capital projects, the cost of those projects and the extent of capital projects change year over year. So there's quite a bit of variability as well. When we look at our budget development schedule, we introduced the budget concepts back in August through this meeting today, presenting to the board, and then through the fall until February, it's reporting back to municipal input sections to get municipal understanding of the constraints, what they might be experiencing as well, and to make sure that they have an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. In January, we review comments and that have been compiled, and then February, the annual general meeting, go through the actual budget approval and consideration, I should say. So certainly we've provided this overview that you've got here that shows the impacts to the 2024 budget. Help drive, help assist with planning the budget, and really want to highlight. So the purpose of today too is to get your people, if there's anything that you think would help explain the budget better, we're happy to receive that input and make modifications to the packages that we provided. So certainly, as you can see here, there's kind of three main areas that are driving some of these impacts to our budget. I've mentioned a few of them already about our reorganization, but that reorganization, it affects us kind of indirectly. In the past, when we are able to leverage funding, we could apply that to our broader suite of programs and services and look at the overall budget as a whole. Now, when really separating out those category 1 programs, I'd say it's harder to find those projects to leverage funds and grant opportunities for those category 1 mandatory programs. Certainly find that with category 3 programs. So there's a little bit of a shift in how it impacts our budget indirectly. We also have our deliverables that are required prior to the end of December 2024, and want to make sure that we're also delivering services that are needed by municipalities through planning and development. Again, that's driving a lot of costs. Historically, we've got what we're calling chronically underfunded or inadequate provincial transfer payments. You see that in what has been provided of $181,213 for everything that we're doing related to hazards. But also our reserves, we have been depleting reserves, especially when we weren't eligible for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit during COVID. During that time, we didn't hire, held vacancies open, but we really did use up some of those reserves. And then our overall operating environment. As many of you as municipalities also are experiencing, that there's a number of factors that are going. I'm going to expand on those a little bit more in the next slides. So with the new legislative requirements, we always talk about the additional work. Thought I would actually list all the deliverables that are required for us to undertake, and also highlight that there's no provincial funding to offset the costs of doing these works. You can see them all there. This is all part of the mandatory programs and services regulation that you see, but significant effort will be required to complete operation asset management plans, looking at ice management plans, our land management strategy. I've also pointed out these areas where we also have to undertake external consultation as well, which will take additional time and resources. We have our lands inventory you heard about last meeting, and then to develop a land acquisition and disposition policy and strategy, as well as our broader watershed-based resource management strategy. Again, that will require a significant consultation, and there's been an update provided in the board package later today. Next slide. Some of the other legislative changes that are affecting us, of course, more homes built faster and more homes for everyone. Requiring significant reductions in timelines for commenting on planning and development reviews. We want to meet these service delivery standards to assist our municipalities. It is really about trying to expedite the approvals processes and while also supporting our consultation and ongoing efforts for updating our hazard mapping. We recognize that municipalities are certainly focusing in on many requiring their housing targets to be met, provide faster approvals. But hand in hand with that comes with updated hazard mapping. We really need to know where those areas are to allow for safe development. Much of our mapping hadn't been updated since the early 90s. With new information like LiDAR, we know their mapping's out of date, and oftentimes that becomes a delay in the process when we don't have that mapping readily available to provide comments on where those hazards exist. So that's a huge push to get that done. And with all of these legislative changes, this is impacting our budget in the tune of about. Next slide. With the operating environment, of course, like many municipalities are also facing, we're dealing with high inflation rates over the last few years. We're hoping to see some decline in that, but not expected over the short term. Also with staff retention and compensation, we undertook a full compensation review in 2022 and started implementing it July of that year, with implementation happening in 2023. But through that process, we did use reserves. We recognize that we need to retain and attract new staff. We had a lot of retirements, and we really felt that was needed in order to ensure that we had the staffing complement needed to fulfill our programs and services. We also dealing with the minister's direction to freeze fees on planning and development reviews. That is for 2023. There's no indication if that will be lifted. We're kind of anticipating the status quo. We also, as with municipalities, significant increase in growth demands, not only with development applications, but as we see growth and development happening in our surrounding areas, it's also puts increased pressure on our own CA lands. Certainly in areas where the front entrance here, for example, and at Pedoc, there's plans of subdivisions coming right up adjacent to our lands and additional encroachment activities. Not to mention the same stresses that municipalities have with the unhoused and homelessness and encampments on our own property. So all of these things are under increased demand. And then, of course, as I think we've all seen, a significant increase in capital costs. We've had quotes coming in for proposed activities that have doubled in prices for these capital projects. I think the City of London uses a material as a cost of the road increasing by 25%. Certainly 10% seems to be the average for non-residential construction costs increases to account for. So we're trying to incorporate that into our as well. More historical impacts. Some of you will be around to remember the cut of our transfer payment. 39 funding happening in 2019. But really historically the intent of the program was 50% coverage of the flood control program provided by the province. Certainly we haven't seen that. It's more like less than 13% coverage of the program costs. Certainly with aging infrastructure and I would say it seems to be more frequent flooding events and monitoring needing to be all year round rather than focusing on the spring freshet. There's a lot more activity and a lot more staffing requirements to oversee that area of our program. And of course, the impact with not being able to access those federal wage subsidies during the pandemic. Certainly depleted our reserves as well. So with capital projects, there's certainly been significant increases with some special benefiting rates with some municipalities. But again, when we're looking at capital, it goes back to those special benefiting rates. There are certain municipalities that bear the higher benefit for projects. St. Mary's flood wall, significant project that town of St. Mary's will see 100% of that benefit for. There'll be increases with those capital rates because of that, because of work being done at Mitchell Dam, and also significant effort with West London Dykes moving on to the design project. I think it's phase 8 now. Certainly we're seeing these aging infrastructures and more maintenance as well. Much of our infrastructure was completed even across the province after as a result of Hurricane Hazel, wanting to improve protection. And you can imagine with the timeline for that, we're seeing a lot of old infrastructure needing to be replaced. This is again where we've seen some of the proposals being doubled. But also when we've considered capital projects, we did look at what could be put off. And that's always a weight. Some of the capital projects like West London Dykes, it has to proceed this year. The design needs to be done in order for it to be the design work to be prepared to tender for the project review in order to utilize federal funds that are available. There's a certain timeline for having access to those funds, so the work has to be completed. Of the capital projects, I believe Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but around over 730,000 that certainly needs to be done, and another 300,000 that could be delayed. And at the same time, we're just pushing that problem down the road, and it's gonna have to be done because of the risks that that work us from. Next slide. Just kind of wanted to put it in perspective when we're looking at the different categories of programs and services. The pie charts are proportional to see where the municipal levy contributions go, where the transfer payment is received. Certainly you see that in category 1, the total amount. About 35% of the overall, which are in category 1, 2, and 3, and the other category 3 of concern is a request for levy. That's about 60% of the category 1 programs. I think we do an excellent job of self-generating revenue. We allocate our costs throughout those other program areas so that we can recoup some of those overheads for things that are required for communications and marketing to HR to other program areas. We try to offset municipal ask for levy through category 1 by utilizing land lease revenues. Many areas where we try to reduce those costs, and that's why you're seeing the 60% there. Certainly, we're still working through our category 3 agreements. But even with those category 3 agreements there, you look at the municipal contributions in the light blue color. It's only about 12% of the overall costs of delivering that program that we're asking from our municipal partners to see if we return on investment, seeing those services provided throughout our watershed. So with that, next slide, I can give a quick update on should say the category programs and services again that we've mentioned, those category 1, 2, and 3, where levy can be applied and where we're providing services on behalf of a municipality. Category 2 programs, those are very specific, often with the City of London ESA management and our risk management services that we provide for a number of our municipalities, both in our watershed and beyond within the forest protection region. And then the category 3 is that we're having an agreement to continue to provide those services on a watershed basis. So the next slide is just kind of the status of where we are with the cost apportionment agreements, focusing most on where the largest percent apportionment is, down to those smaller apportionments. and moving through to get those agreements fully executed. Many are going to council or have been approved at committee and are moving towards council or through area councils. So we're getting there too. So next slide. Just kind of a final wrap up when we're talking about our budget. We have certainly a lot of this impacts are tied to those legislative responsibilities where there hasn't been any funding to offset those costs. Certainly operation and capital costs are rising as well. Aging infrastructure, maintenance costs are significantly higher, but also those operational matters related to everything from insurance to inflation. And then also we're trying to mitigate those costs as we always do. CAs across the province have different amounts that they are able to mitigate costs for municipal levy. I think we do an excellent job in comparison with many of our other partners and other CAs. Again, those contributions are less than 35% of our overall budget. So certainly seeing certain return on investment there and what we're able to provide. So with that, we'll open the floor to any questions that come of our budget. There's been a few different updates to this. We realized we were missing kind of a table at the end, so we've updated that as well. So it might be a little bit different than what we circulated, but this is a work in process. We will hear any comments you have and things that will help clarify the budget process and speaking to municipalities wanting to hear some discussion today. Oh,
perfect. So what we'll do is I will limit, we will have time for discussion, but I'll limit to questions right now on the actual presentation and budget. And then we can have a fulsome discussion of the issue once we get a motion on the floor. But I will start with Skyland.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the work that staff have done putting into the budget and making it accessible. Through the chair, I'm wondering, given the 1.5 million increases specifically from provincial legislation impacts, has there been any discussion with any ministries or MPPs regarding possible compensation to address those increases?
Yeah. Through the chair.
Yeah, so I can say from the board level, there has not been, this is a draft budget. We will have to make sure that is, we'll have to get somewhere to have that approved by the board. We have discussions, and then if that's the board's will, that certainly can take place. I will say that it's been, those are known by the province, that these are issues, and so far they've been silent on the issue of providing any more funding. And in fact, we heard in 2019, they cut our funding by 50%. So certainly willing to do that if that's the board's wish. And I think it's valid. Like obviously they need to pay more their share on this. They've provided the work. They're putting that on the backs of municipalities, which is really what we see in this whole budget package. We're asked to do more work and there's less funding opportunities, but
CO.
Yeah, through the chair, we could say that Conservation Ontario has been very involved trying to approach the province in requesting additional funding to support Section 39, but also to support the water and control infrastructure program. There's a cap on % dollars that are available, but there's only 10, how many million, Chris, available throughout the province? 5 million throughout the province, and it has to be utilized within a 1-year time period. So certainly some advocacy efforts from Conservation Ontario are there to either increase those caps or increase the duration over which the funding can be realized. Some of the projects are quite large, and having that secure source of funding over a couple of years to ensure the project completion has been a challenge for some. And even the 50% cap on dollars, hearing from many municipalities that if that funding cap could be raised so that it's a higher percentage to offset those costs. And all drivers, all recognizing where we are operationally right now with some of these aging infrastructure pieces. So.
And
But I think what Councillor Frank was actually talking about was on the operating side, the requirements that have been mandated for all conservation authorities. So on one hand, for us to go to the ministry, it's kind of but on behalf of the other conservation authorities, my understanding is CO has been talking to members of parliament on this issue. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
further questions?
Thank you, Switch Chair. I was wondering, does staff have any idea in conversations with other conservation areas? Are they all facing the same thing? Are they all approaching it similar, or do you have any knowledge?
Through the chair, I could say that it varies widely throughout the province. And I think it comes back to how each conservation authority has been using or getting a municipal levy. It varies significantly. I think we're on the low end of the amounts that we get to levy contributions. Other CAs rely and have been for years. I think Rideau Valley up in Ottawa, I think their levy contribution has been about 80% of their programs. And so that's a significant variable throughout the province as well as there are other opportunities to offset costs. Some CAs don't have the full suite program that we offer. They might be very smaller and have 12 staff employees. So there is a lot of variability. I think that there's at least 4 CAs that are anticipating a double-digit increase in their levies this year.
Yeah. Refresh my memory, wasn't there at one time London provided what they call growth funding for helping us process their applications? Is that, my recollection is that's no longer in effect?
Through the chair, I don't believe it's no longer in effect. There is still assessment growth cases. We did submit for assessment growth funding couple of years ago when we first saw that some of these changes were about to happen, although the process for accessing the funds has changed. When it comes to, as they term it, soft services or reviewing Planning Act application, that ranks very low on the prioritization list compared to the number of streets or lights that need to be replaced, or the length of street pavement that needs to be maintained. Those kind of hard services are the prioritization for where assessment growth funding can be. So our last request had been denied and been oversubscribed from what I understand for previous years. Much uptake because of the growth experience, but perhaps some of our London members will have more insight.
Yeah, just isn't there help coming from London to work on some process improvements at this end?
Certainly, through the chair, I can pass it over to Jenna to speak to some of the funding that's been provided to service delivery.
Sure. Yeah, through you, Chair, the City of London had received from the provincial government to look at streamlining their approvals process. So they've been undertaking a significant amount of work to hire additional staff, hire consultants, I think using the IT systems and all in an effort to streamline their approvals. So that is something they're interested in looking at our staff to do as well. As an external agency that's providing comments to the city on Planning Act applications, they certainly want to see us trying to streamline and improve our timelines as well. So, and in fact, we're in the process of negotiating a new development MOU with the city, which lays out kind of precisely the exact timelines for each type of application and what their expectations are in terms of providing our review and comments back to the city. So as part of that, they have offered up to $200,000 to the authority to undertake a review of our programs and services related to planning and development. So I've been putting an RFP together to hire a consultant to engage them and looking at that for us. So I think it's a really positive thing for us. It's good news. So it's yeah, so I'm excited about it. I'm hoping it will identify some recommendations for how we can improve our processes, and hopefully take a look at our staffing levels and determine whether we have the capacity to actually achieve the timelines that the city set out for us. So.
And last question, Mr. Chair. On the fee freeze, my recollection of being talking about this at the end of last year was the last opportunity we had to deal with development fees. But even at that time, my recollection is we still only collect about half the cost of actually processing our applications. Is that still pretty much correct?
Yep, through you, Chair. We did undertake a comprehensive review of our fees back in 2021, and we did increase our fees significantly at that time. That was August of that year, and in order to try and achieve our board approved policy, which is 50% cost recovery. So we were sitting around 35% for many years, so not really hitting our 50% target. And so the increase to our fees was trying to really get us there and achieve that 50%. We have seen substantial increase in our fees for both our planning and permitting fees. So I think in 2017, about 16 years ago, we were generating around $200,000 in fees revenue for planning and permits. And we're approaching 900,000 for this year. So we have been significantly increasing our fees revenue, but we've had to add capacity as well. So we're still not quite at our 50% target. And unfortunately they have been frozen.
The costs continue and the rate of application goes up. So that's another element to discuss with the province provincially. Thank you.
Dean?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, thanks to the staff for their preparations and information, especially the draft budget overview. I guess it's laid out like OREG 680, 621 and Bill 109, Section 28. It lays out which legislation has what impact and assigns a dollar value to it. But I guess my question for the staff is, how in our org chart, where does the additional need for additional staff fit into the org chart? It would help to illustrate that. Like I got my sticky notes out on the org chart that you gave me in January, and I made assumptions, but I never get comfortable making assumptions so like that. So it would be helpful to see which departments are impacted with the staffing changes. Like Jenna's pointed out that her department's experienced additional staffing requirements. She did tip us off that the mapping was, when she gave the SWOT analysis presentation in the winter, she did tip us off that the mapping was one of the weaknesses, but I'm unsure about the Section 28 receiving and dealing with the applications. I'm a little bit unclear as to what the dynamics are in that staffing requirement situation.
Through the chair, I think Jenna can answer that, but certainly we can provide an updated org chart that kind of highlights some of those positions. And back in January, what you would have provided probably based slightly on what our plans were. Those plans have had to shift a little bit to different areas of focus over the year. It's again, some were planned later in the year, so they weren't fully funded for that year. So the intent now is to make sure that those positions are fully funded for the entire year since they're continuing on. But Jenna might want to speak to a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, I guess specific to our unit, we have identified a full FTE for our regulations coordinator in 2024. And in 2023, we added an additional environmental engineer. But that staff member was added halfway through the year, so it was a half FTE for 2023 and is going up to a full FTE for 2024. Likewise, we had identified a half an FTE in this year's budget to support our hazard mapping updates, which is moving to a full FTE in 2024. So that's kind of our two FTEs that have been targeted for our unit. And a lot of that has to do with those process timelines and speeding up our approvals. So just having enough capacity to achieve the timelines that are being set out by our municipalities.
Tom, please. I'm sorry, just to make sure, did that answer your question, or were you interested in the other areas as well?
Well, I'm interested in the other areas, but for brevity's sake, I just wanted to focus on those. Those are the top two areas that I wanted to raise a question on, but it would be helpful to see what the impact is across all the areas within the organization.
Good, Tom.
Through the chair, I'd just like to follow up on Sandy's point about potential lobbying or communication efforts with the province. I think the province gets share of income tax. Municipalities get a share of property tax. I think one thing that has affected municipalities is the lack of progress on the assessment rates. And I think that if you look at the total economic picture, we've seen inflations in wages, not necessarily keeping up with inflation in building costs, which is how we calculate fees in general. But that increased value in home assessments has not been realized, which would give municipalities additional tools. And I just think it's something that is a big piece of the puzzle here. If we're not seeing increases in transfers from the province, again, based off income taxes, which are largely static, that might be a pathway to get additional resources into municipalities to cover these costs. And I think it would benefit a lot of different files, not just our own.
So what I'll recommend is, in the past is that, to be honest, the current government has not been in favor of listening to CA's recommendations, whether it be on the legislation or on funding. But they have been more open to hearing municipalities. Certainly, I think they listened to municipalities when it was changes to the Conservation Act they wanted. I don't know if those same municipalities are liking the outcome of that. So I think that what we need to do around the table is with our member municipalities is go back and get them on board, because I think it's pretty fair to say that we're looking at a substantial increase. And so that's not going to be, everybody's going to have tight budgets. I'm hearing everybody out there already that, municipalities around the province are facing a larger increase this year than normal, just due to coming out of COVID, everything getting back to normal, different way of doing different business. So there's pressures on everyone out there. But if we partner together and say, okay, this is not acceptable, and the main reason it's not acceptable is because the province isn't paying their fair share. This is coming back to municipalities. This wasn't what we're looking for. We need those, I guess in short, we need those partners from municipalities to be there, because we have a better chance of being listened to rather than if it was just conservation, even in Ontario, because the province isn't interested in listening. They're just interested in giving us more work to do. So that will be a message. I think that'll be very strongly made to member municipalities, is, as we've seen in this budget, that this is a clear case of downloading and asking them to do more without having any say in it. And I agree with you with the assessment. There's always different tools that you can use to get more revenue. And that's certainly what staff is looking for here too, is different tools rather than just placing on municipalities. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to maybe follow up with maybe your comments. And, I really agree that we, as a municipality, need to do a better job understanding CAs and where we've gone. I still recall 2019, when we had half of our funding reduced. And yet the demands have grown and the costs have grown. And I'm not exactly sure how municipalities, how councils really understand all these changes. I even know being on the board, we're being hit with a lot of changes. So how do we transfer that information over to our municipalities just to really understand? And if we are going to be funding or supporting CAs, then we really need, as a municipality, to understand the implications of the consequences as well. And I'm not sure how we do that. I think key messaging is really important. Even the fact that 12% of category 3, and I'm not even sure how councils understand the different categories even are funded by municipalities. That it's only 12%. Category 3, but there tends to be this challenge that we're all facing, especially in the City of London. Our budget is going to be tough. So we need to have a really good understanding where we are and where the needs are. And if that's not going to happen, what those consequences are. So that's where I would like to start. As much as I would love to reach out to the province and have better conversations, but I know my time even on the AMO board, there's not very many conversations going on there. So I think it just falls back on the councils to have a good understanding why we are where we are, and opportunities going forward too. I think we always have to be optimistic that things will come around somehow to keep us whole, but we have to start with better understanding of where we are today, where the changes have occurred, and the reasons why we are in this deficit. So,
And I think the question in there was, how do we inform our municipalities? And I think that will certainly happen. Tracy and I've offered to be there as well, to go to the municipalities and do presentations to make sure we give the information and a chance to offer questions, answer questions that come from the different municipal councils and provide that information. It is extremely important that our municipalities realize where these issues are being driven from and what's being asked of them. And so they fully are understanding of, you know, it's the same thing of going back. There's only one ratepayer at the end of the day. And whether you're a municipal council or you're a person with a property that you're being taxed on, it's the same that you're asking them to pay a bill, and you should be informed of what that is. You may not have a say in yes or no, but at least you have the information to say why it is. And then if you don't agree with it, there's different ways of mechanisms for that. But the best way to do is through collaboration, again, with the CAs. We're on the same page here, I think, as municipalities, as far as saying we shouldn't be paying these costs shouldn't be borne by the municipalities as much as they are. This is a provincial responsibility, provincial ask. There should be funding there. And historically there was. You know, that structure out there was paid, I believe, 75% funding. The province used to fund a lot of things 50-50, if not more. They were there to be partners on a bigger scale, and that's the thing. So I don't know if we made whole. I'm less optimistic about that. I haven't seen that trend at all. I've seen the trend the opposite way. And at the end of the day, it is just one ratepayer, but it's at a different bill, and it becomes it's not spread out as much across the province for a benefit that does have a provincial wide benefit. Dean and then Skylar. Oh yes, Tom, sorry, Tom. I had Dean written down.
I'm just wondering if this is the appropriate time to bring up the discussion about electronic communications modernization, whether that's something to have an appropriate budget line item for it.
If there's a question about it, then we can answer that, or if we can do that also in the we can have a discussion about that in the motion, I think. Okay.
Following up on that previous discussion. I'm just wondering, so I'm fine with not having like the Upper Thames do its own advocacy work directly. It sounds like we'd rather municipalities do it, which I'm okay with. I'm wondering, in the past, have there ever been any kind of like communication plan in relation to that that is provided to municipal partners and councillors to do that work? Because based on previous experience, I don't want to kind of go rogue and use my own talking points. So I'm wondering if there is that opportunity so we're all on the same page, we're all kind of singing from the same choir book. If there's ever been like a 1 or 2 pager that we could use.
Just to clarify, I don't want the municipalities just doing it. I want to be a partner. It's got to be a partnership and collaboration, because that's the only way that you can build that consensus around and get the push. So no, but I think there's 100% opportunity there for that correct information being provided. And I think that will be provided through the council presentations. And then that can be certainly shared and followed up upon with staff.
Perfect.
Further questions of the budget? George. Gems. I'm having a day.
When I was going through the budget, I did notice one line item there, and it was about the fairly large increase in insurance and cyber insurance. Do we currently have cyber insurance, or is that included there?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, we do, and I can direct it to Chris Tasker and Christine. Cyber insurance, absolutely. Yeah, we've had it 4 years, I'm thinking, maybe 5.
And is that a fairly large additional portion?
It hasn't been, but it will be growing.
In the future as well, there is on our schedule, the board will receive an enclosed in-camera update on our cybersecurity efforts. So that is as well a later time.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I noticed in the documents looking forward to 2025, there was going to be a projected $1 million levy increase. I understand the levy increase for 2024, so I just don't quite understand what's driving continued increase into 2025. Is it connected to our 2024 timelines, or is there something more adding to that situation?
So we're still anticipating a further deficit in 2025. We've got one in 2024 with these figures. We're still thinking there will be more deficit in 2025. But you've seen the reserves are not there. We're not going to get past 2025 without filling those holes, deficits, and getting to a point where we're pretty break even. And it has to happen sooner rather than later.
I guess a supplementary question then, Mr. Chair, if I could. So it was mentioned earlier that the changes in the wage structure were initially absorbed by reserves. So that those numbers being the same going forward, with no funds in the reserves, then they have to come out of levy, if I'm following the progression of things correctly.
Unless we have major increases in revenue or new revenue streams, major cuts, or.
So we had costs already, and then, but the reserves covered them for the short term, but we still have those costs going forward, and
Yeah, we will
Okay.
continue to have those costs.
thank you. That helps. Thanks.
This is historical context for the board as well, for members who weren't here. Traditionally, the UTRCA has used reserves to offset levy and contributions and keep the levy lower than it could be. We're seeing that right now. We have a deficit of $1 million in category 1 funding. That could come from other sources, but if it doesn't, it's going to have to come from reserves. That's not a sustainable practice. So we have to come. That reserve policy and stuff will help us with that to inform that in the future, but that's not certainly eventually run out of reserves to offset. So we do need to start increasing levy. And going back to what Tracy was saying about how other CAs operate, some have never done that. They've just traditionally put everything on the levy. And so they're facing less of an increase because they don't have that pressure to reduce those reserve amounts.
On that point, I think it's in the package that came with the agenda. You know, the upside of some of the work that would be required to do by the province is going to put us in better shape, particularly around asset management, but also the land inventory. And then there was a comment in there that, if I understand it, once we've identified lands that we could dispose of, how can that money be used? And will there be opportunities to mitigate levy as discussed in future? Or has the province also made it even harder to apply that money to reduce levy?
Yes, through the chair, that's still a question out there because the process related to land sales has changed with the problem. Again, now we notify the minister once a land sale has been undertaken and it meets our acquisition and disposition policies that we have developed through the next year. So that process has changed, but through that notification to the minister may direct the authority on how those revenues are used. Now, we're hopeful that our proposal is that any land sales would go into a specified reserve fund. Any interest gained on that specified reserve fund could potentially be used to offset operational costs related to land sale or land activities and land management activities. And then that reserve fund be available for any acquisitions that would further enhance and meet our goals through our watershed-based resource management strategy or our land strategy to either acquire additional lands or enhance additional lands beyond our own. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it right now, but I'm not sure if any CAs have been through the process this recently since those changes have been in effect to know how minister's direction, if there is minister's direction on those funds.
And in any case, it sounds like it won't really affect budgets here until 2026 at the earliest.
Yeah, through the chair, want to clarify and make it I'm actually upset with Mr. Levin for stealing my question.
We've been here too long.
That was my question.
Jim, and then
With the legislative changes taking up 68% of the budget increase, the mandatory deliverables by the end of December 2024. What's the outcome if we just don't have them completed? I mean, or is there a B, C, and D deliverable? Is there any way we can? I'm just looking for options.
I'll say through the chair. Yes, that's been questioned. Every other legislative change that we've seen, there has been a process to request an extension. There is not an extension request with these legislative changes. So again, I don't know what impact that could have if they're not completed. Certainly there are some other CAs that are asking the same question. But we're uncertain. Would they withhold their transfer payments? I don't know. But yeah, if anyone else has had any not meeting legislative timelines that they could share, then certainly welcome understanding of what might be.
my take on it is that it is legislation, it is approved, and that it's a provincial law, and so we should make every effort to try to keep in line with that as a board and as an organization. I'm looking towards a grant here. It's probably not a great idea to openly try to break laws. And kind of gives them an opportunity, if we did do that, to we don't know what the consequences would be, but I don't think responsible wise, we would be in the best shape to be saying, okay, we're just not gonna do it. But certainly, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we're seeing is that everything is stacked and it has to be done at the same time. A lot of these, if they could be over a 2 or 3 year period, it would give staff a lot of options on how to accomplish those at a much more efficient scale. And stay with the outcomes. I don't think anybody disagrees with the outcome product is going to be useful. We use a lot of them in municipalities as far as asset management plans and all that stuff. But it's really, and want to have up-to-date information about what you're working with. But really, at the end of the day, it's the time frame crunch that's really driving the budget impacts as much as it is. But again, back to your question, I don't think it would be prudent to ignore the legislation.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation, everyone. I've got a question just following up on the lands that we already own and the impact assessments and how that may change or look going forward. Any concerns there, or is that just sort of like a mute point right now?
I can pop in on that one. The thing that some of us may not realize is that UTRCA pays taxes on its lands to our member municipalities. So it is a revenue stream, but then it comes back. And that's one of those things that is a complicated issue, is that how much money are we paying, our municipalities paying back to ourselves that we're already paying. It's a little bit complicated because some of the lands are dispersed throughout the organization. It's not all municipality A, municipality B. That's certainly been an issue that I think needs to be explored as to, is there a better way of just in and outing? Because a certain part of this budget, municipal taxes that you're looking for revenue at your municipalities.
And just following up on that, I know the provincial government has not done reassessments for a number of years as well. I think we go back to 2016, they've postponed doing new assessments. Given the difference in values these number of years, who knows what those amounts will be and how that will change. So just think it should be on our radar as we go forward, maybe having a better understanding how the money comes and goes and
part of the land use strategy. Lands inventory.
The land's inventory.
so.
Questions on the budget document? Well. Yeah, mine. Okay. Thank you, everyone. There is a recommended a recommendation there. Would anybody like to move the recommendation? Scotty, seconder. Anna. Discussion.
While maintaining confidentiality, we did have some insight into the benefit of modernizing our communications plan at the Finance and Audit Committee, and just wondering if this would be the appropriate time to request a quote for inclusion in the draft budget.
Perhaps staff could comment if the budget contains anything that would work towards modernization.
Sorry, I'm just trying to remember. Christine, I don't think there's anything at this point.
Not specifically.
Not specifically, just more generalities.
Something that could be done, Working with budget cycles, that's something that could be put forward through a notice of motion throughout the year to give staff direction and give time to work on that for the 2025 budget for inclusion. Given the timelines, I doubt that's something that could be completed within before the budget's approval. But that's something that certainly could be worked on.
We have the report for April.
Absolutely. So I think we can give direction from that, and then staff will have time to work that into budget documents for what that would include.
Yeah, I just thought it might be timely.
Any other discussion? Jim, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As we've gone through the budget, we've been aware of this for a couple of months now because of the preliminary presentations and whatnot. And I completely understand all these legislative changes and mandatory changes. I'm disappointed that there was no additional funds. However, downloading is nothing new to any of the members sitting around this table at their different municipalities and whatnot. And I think if we took the approach of financial responsibility, anytime this happened, and then our decision without any options was just to increase staff by 9%, I just struggle approving anything like that. So therefore, I will not be supporting the budget.
Do you have any suggestions on how we could?
I mean, there's different ways. I mean, you have to look at services, you have to complete service delivery. Maybe some things fall out. There's, I don't know, but it's just unsustainable, especially with the finances the way they are, no reserves. To just increase staff by, it's just not staff, and you've got benefits and everything else. You're adding, it's another 25% on top. It's a difficult thing. I mean, I was really hoping staff would come saying, you know, we could do this, or you know, could increase the work week by 2 hours, or I mean, I have no idea, but I'm just in the 10 seconds thinking about it. But I just, it's a huge increase, and I understand where it's coming from, but I'm not saying that we shouldn't completely disregard the mandatory changes. But maybe staff is trying to do good diligence and always given the A job. Maybe by the end of December, we get it done, but it's not where we want it, and we'll refine over the next couple of years, and we'll be at B stage or something.
So what, just to clarify, just what you're looking for from staff is possible options, if there's, to see where there would be options of, for service level decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think that it's going to be tough out there. And we're a very small player in the overall schemes, but I can just think of something like somebody the size of the city of London, all of a sudden say, we're going to increase staff by 9% because that's what we need. We've been given this downloading. It just wouldn't happen, I would think.
Through you to staff, and you know, maybe different staff will answer that. There are some options that I'm sure staff have already looked at. One of the options in terms of the staffing side of it is my assumption is that you looked at when you would be able to hire people to start the various pieces that are new. So is it correct that this budget does not start all those people on January 1st? I see heads nodding, but people with their backs to you can't see your heads nodding.
Yes, that's true. We forecast our wages by month. So if we expect a new position to be filled in April, we start the cost in April for the remainder. Yeah, it's not a full year.
Okay. So
Too much.
I think things like that are helpful for municipal councils to know that we've looked at those kinds of things when we talk to them, when we said. Secondly, you know, again, keeping with Jim's question is, we knew this was coming. We looked at the existing staff capacity to complete the tasks. Yes, I assume you did that. And the answer back was, we don't have the capacity to complete these tasks on time. Is that
That's correct as well.
And we have to rely on staff to be giving us an honest answer as a board. One of the other things I know I talked to Christine about this morning is a way to mitigate some of the capital costs instead of levying all at one time would be through us borrowing the money. Why is that not a consideration? Why would you as a staff not recommend we go down that road?
Many reasons, actually. So the first one is we're not in a cash crunch. We have cash. What we don't have is revenue for 2024, sufficient revenue for 2024. It's a different thing. So we wouldn't need to borrow to spend. Second thing is capital spending is by and large member specific spending. So if a specific municipality needed a break on their levy, for example, if we went to borrow as an organization, if we went to borrow, the entire organization would bear the cost of that. You would have additional operating expenses, and it would be a benefit that would be really created for one municipality, not all municipalities. So there's a fairness issue there as well. We're also trying to levy for the capital work that needs to be done in each municipality as it needs to be done. And when we do that, we hold that levy and we use it over time for the cost, the future cost of all those capital repairs. So when we levy it when we need it, we're no longer burdening future operating budgets, which we would be doing if we didn't levy right now. Now, we have in the past not levied, you can see in this budget, we have in the past not levied fully for the capital work in a certain year. We let that reserve drop and then we try to levy later for it, effectively becoming a banker for each municipality. Well, we're not in that position. We're not large enough to be a banker to our members. So we're required to levy for the work that needs to be done. There is still negotiating room in the work that needs to be done for capital works. So that is a more flexible part of our overall budget. But borrowing would put a burden on our operating budget. And that's where we can't afford it. That's exactly where we can't afford it. So borrowing is not recommended.
The other thing that I'm wondering if staff looked at was, I see we basically maintain that 65% levy funding of category 1, even though we could have
Going to 100.
gone to 100. And the way we've mitigated that is through, if I understand it, at least one way was using more program revenue to offset category 1 costs. What would be the impact if we used more program costs to offset category 1 and reduce the levy? A, would it be that much money? And B, what would be the negative impact of doing that?
Say that question again.
Well, so the report, sure. The report says program revenue has been or is being used in the 2024 budget to offset category 1 costs.
Yeah.
Right?
Land leases, investment income, that sort of thing.
Right. My assumption is one could take more program revenue and offset more category 1 costs.
Out of program 3, for example?
Wherever.
This
It
is,
would be it would have to be category 3, because category 2 is either all City of London, it's City of London and drinking water or source water protection.
Mostly, yes, yeah.
Category 3 is quote unquote optional. Even though it's like $4.8 million of costs and it's only 12% municipalities are paying for, that's a sweetheart deal. But having said that, it is being used to offset category 1, some category 1 costs.
Already, yeah.
All right, what if we change that to increase more of the category 1 cost? Could we do it? Would it be a significant impact on the levy? Why wouldn't we do it?
The costs have to fall in the category they belong. You can't move your costs around. So if it's a category 3 program that generates money, well, great, because it's going to be self-sustaining one day, hopefully, right? That's why we only need 12% levy in category 3. We're already putting category 1 costs into category 3 by allocating to all the programs. We're taking our admin, our fund, not our admin, sorry about that one, our finance, our HR, some of our fleet costs, our marketing and communication. If a program of our 240 programs requires those services, that's where the cost falls. So we're not levying 100% in category 1. We're also not putting 100% of our category 1 costs, eligible costs, in category 1. We're moving some of those costs down into other programs. We can't make it sweeter in category 1. I don't know the way to do that. I wish I did. But that body of programs in category 1 are those programs that the province has said we must do. And we've tried every way we can to find a way to adequately fund them. And even in this budget, they're creating a deficit to this organization. And that's mandatory work. So not funding mandatory work under regulation, knowingly not adequately funding it, I believe there is a large risk. I can't shuffle costs any more than we have.
To follow up on that point, but board needs to recognize that category 3 was part of the general levy before.
Yes.
And so those grants and opportunities were much more able to offset what would be category funding now. But it's just not able to. There may be more grants and things available than there was before that staff may not be able to access now because those categories don't fit in anymore. So this splitting things out, at one point, yes, category 3, 12%. But now you're picking up 60% of that cost over here in category 1. Where it seems to be, it normally is. So maybe it's not, it's just a red herring and we were just covering those category 3 programs. But the chance to offset revenue or levy is way down now. We can only do it in category 3. We can do it in category 1 if there was programs that are available, there's not. So we have to be very careful about how much we champion category 3. I think it is a great news story, and I think that's why municipalities should, if we can do that at municipal level, we should sign up in a heartbeat as fast as we can. Sign the agreements, get them done, because look at the deal you're getting. Look at the offset you're getting. It's unheard of. Even in category 1, though, it could be 100% municipal funding. It's being offset. So that is unheard of at the municipal level, but we need to realize where these drivers are coming from. Specifically, because there is no other funding source. But staff I'm hearing they're doing everything they can for member municipalities to offset that cost as much as possible. Oh,
He's wearing his name tag?
yeah.
To Jim's point about affordability, I think it's good to look at some other indicators and like we've been looking at these because we're all going through budgeting ourselves. And I think when you look at the wage increase that people are getting, it's somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5, with an average of 3.8 when corporations were surveyed what they're budgeting for increased wages in 2023. Inflation's around 5%. So again, that's not meeting up with inflation. I think we've kept pace with our wages for the most part, with the exception of the allocation to from reserves for 2021. Is that correct? So it seems like that's kind of where a little bit of this gap is, an unfunded gap that we have to come up with. But again, that would probably be another 3%. So it seems like there's another 3% that's coming from increasing service to meet regulation.
So just to clarify that, the board made a unanimous decision when staff brought forward the wage. We went up to market and we realized we're $1 million behind here because we were losing staff just for that reason, because they used to use April to April CPI. And it didn't help because the market moved differently. We have very specialized staff. It doesn't really work with CPI. So staff are able to use deferred revenue to mitigate that budget year to help municipalities out. But then that funding runs out, and you're seeing it in this budget again as well. We had 1.5 million in deferred revenue that was used to offset costs last year. Now it's 230. You can't make that up any other way than asking it for somewhere else. So when we get those, and then it was only a half year increase before, now we're seeing the full effects of everything. So I agree with you that, our staff are at the heart of this organization. If we don't have the qualified staff to do something and pay them adequately, we saw the effects of that before. That's why we had to add $1 million to the budget, was just to be able to keep staff and make sure that we were, able to attract new staff. And these are challenges. Unfortunately, when, I applaud staff for always looking for every way to try to mitigate those costs, but unfortunately you run out of moves eventually and you have to put that on somebody who can pay, and unfortunately it's municipalities at this point.
So yeah, to your point, like we did give ratepayers a break during the pandemic, and now the bill's coming due. But I still think there is a small component that's coming from trying to meet new regulatory timelines without having the revenue tools for service. And I know like we have had discussions about the importance of that. And I think if we look at it from our municipal perspective, there's an onus on our own planning departments to coordinate and collaborate with the Conservation Planning Authority. So just as an alternative proposal, if it was at all possible to defer some of the additional staffing expenses on a trial basis to see what actual efficiencies can we get from additional collaboration, and are we able to meet these timelines without additional resources? That might be something on a trial basis but I don't think it would cover more than 2% in terms of and I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that, you break it all down and there's not a lot of leeway, and it comes down to work that needs to be done somehow.
And I agree with you. If we have more timeline to be able to meet those regulations, then just the end of next year, there may be that opportunity to be able to try different options. But with the timelines that we're facing, we're gonna be all hands on deck to be able to meet those timelines.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment through you, Mr. Chair, about I think to some extent we're doing a bit of catch up here as well. Throughout the years, I know staff in the past have not had increases and we've deferred parts of our strat plan just to be able to meet the numbers, and then we throw in a pandemic, not able to get the funding from the federal government to support the wages. As was one little example of the challenges that the CA has had the past number of years, and just listening to the comments and from staff, and I really appreciate the work that staff has done on this budget. To me, it's almost like we're trying to catch up and maybe not doing a very good job, but that's the reality of some of the decisions we've made in the past as well that we have to, in particular, keeping staff, you're at the authority and being competitive with other places as well. So, just kind of like that perfect storm happening. I think it's happening all over the place. Not just here.
Come back to Jim kind of kicked this part of the discussion off. But I too am skeptical about hiring new staff at the municipal level whenever our management comes to us and says we need to hire more people. I always challenge it. And I always lose the vote to the point that we vote growing our municipal office. What I fully understand that these deadlines, which most of them are at the end of next year, require an extra 90 people to meet these deadlines. But I was disappointed at the last meeting when the board was told that not only do we need these people for the next year and a half or whatever to meet these deadlines and work, these people are going to be kept on and become permanent afterwards. And I understand why we need to bite the bullet and hire 9 or 10 extra people to meet these deadlines. I'm not real happy that we're going to maybe create positions for these people permanently, which is going to add dollars to our budget in 25, 26, 27 going on. I'm fully in favor of increasing staff to meet the deadlines, but I'm not in favor of that this is a permanent increase to our staffing level.
I'll start through the chair. Certainly there's two aspects of these legislative changes. One is about the More Homes for Everyone Act, and building faster. Those timelines are set now. They're in effect moving forward. So having that staffing capacity to comment on those applications and deal with permit applications and having mapping resources not only created but then maintained, because we don't want to be in a position where we update the maps and then they sit for another 20 years and become outdated. It's about that maintenance. Those positions specifically are needed because of these legislative changes. When it comes to the specific deliverables for our mandatory program services, the operations and asset management plan for the water structures, and our strategy for our CA lands, it's those activities that, again, we don't have an asset management plan. So the intent is to hire an individual to work on those projects specifically, but then shift over to asset management plan moving forward. Dealing with our lands, Brent can speak to some of those challenges. It's not just the lands management strategy. We're trying to backfill to allow current staff to work away at that and the lands inventory and acquisition and disposition policies, but it's that growth that's happening all around us. We need more staff out there to deal with encroachment. So yes, it's partly driven by the legislative changes, but it's also this operational context that we're living in now because of growth activities. So with that, maybe Brent wants to speak a little bit more about some of the lands needs and staffing requirements that we're seeing there.
Yes. Through the chair, the three strategies that we have in the lands is first, it starts with the lands inventory. So staff have already undertaken that, and Brendan had provided an update at the last meeting. So that requires some further refinements in next year. The land strategy to guide the management of Conservation Authority lands, that's the major piece for next year. That's going to take a lot of staffing requirements. It'll be a combination. I think there was a question earlier, where are these FTEs? And they're really across the board. So when we talk about Conservation Authority owned lands and controlled lands, we really need to involve and engage a number of different staff, whether it's our biologists, our land management coordinator, our land management supervisors, technicians that are on the ground, all of the management staff through conversations and discussion. So there's a components of different FTEs. Marketing communications also plays a role in that as well through the consultation, the duties to consult. So when you add up all those different components, that's where you get some of those staffing. But as we know, the unprecedented pressures on our passive recreational areas has grown through COVID and it remains still high. And so if we pull out some of these staff, like our land management coordinator, land management supervisors, our technicians, and the components of different staff throughout the authority, those roles still need to be fulfilled on the ground in 2024. Beyond 2024, and Jim, you had the question, what's the risk of deferring some of these activities, legislative activities? If we defer that work, we're only really deferring that challenge that we've been deferring all along of actually passing that levy or increasing that levy. If we don't do it next year, we're going to be further behind on our strategy. We're going to be further behind on our disposition policies. We're going to be further behind on how we manage our lands. And so it will come full circle before we know it. And so it really is the benefit of the authority to have these strategies done as quickly as possible, but certainly does come at a cost. So.
And just to follow up on that, the deliverable for the province is the strategy, but then they expect us to implement those strategies. And those were something that we weren't doing before. We were probably doing some of that stuff as operational, but now it has to be formally done. And so now there's deliverables past the actual strategy itself. And I'm sure we'll see direction on those as well as they come out. But it's something that's not just 2024, December 24, you hand in the paperwork and staff are done. This will be ongoing. And so I'm sure there'll be some that will not be, needed. But again, those positions are needed elsewhere. Does anybody have any staff that's not doing anything? That's a joke I use because when you have new councils that come in, it's, there's, people sometimes think there's 20 people out back just waiting for something to do. And I think we all know at a municipal level, that's not the case. And it's certainly, I don't think, the case here. So just another point I just wanted to make real quick as well. When it came up that when Sandy's question was about staff are not budgeted January 1st to start, that's going to add, if those staff are online, again, we're going to see the full cost of those in 2025, which will add to that budget as well, which is some of the increases that are predicted there as we get the full impact of those positions.
Can you, through you to staff, can you give Jim and Paul some assurances that once you get through developing and get to the implementation stage, if you see that there's not a need for all the folks, can we be comforted that you have no concerns about saying to somebody, time to go?
Yeah, through the chair. That's certainly something that we've discussed with the communications plan for the strategies, but then also the hazard mapping and modeling. There may not be a need for that position moving forward. The intent is to hire for a discrete contract period, knowing that it's a 2-year time frame. And certainly there may be other examples as well, but that's one that I can provide right off the bat. But again, that's through till the end of 2025. So really what doesn't impact the 2024 budget.
The other question goes back to the question about the wage subsidy that we weren't eligible for, and certainly would have been quite a bit of money that we could have put in reserves and applied to this year. But my recollection is that at least one of the conservation authorities has challenged that federal decision in court. Do we have any update as to the status of that case, or is it at least still ongoing?
It's ongoing. Toronto region. Pardon me?
We joined in on
Yeah,
that?
we agreed, the board agreed to contribute to that effort at tax court up to, I think it was $20,000. Toronto region has been challenging the federal government at tax court, and it's not ended yet. We haven't seen a bill. They're not really talking about it too much because it's a legal case.
But it hasn't been thrown out.
No, it hasn't been.
It's still ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
So, hope against hope.
That could be $600,000 to the organization, just that. Big bonus here. Be nice.
Yeah, but you certainly can't budget.
No, you can't plan.
Dean and then Tom.
So it's my turn now. Mr. Levin stole mine. That's where I was going to you, Mr. Chair. That's where I was going with the org chart. See where the impacts are across the organization. Yes, there's the short-term need to meet deadlines, but then there's the operational commitments that we're making. Because we have to file these plans, now we have to exercise those plans, so there's a commitment to follow through, and I can see where we need additional help. Or where we need continued full-time employees to do that work. But I guess my assurance would be to see where the people fit in the organization plan first. And then secondly, my assurance would fall in reporting back from staff to the board. We've spent this money in these areas for these people. Here are the results from each of those departments. Here's where we're getting better. Here's where we're getting stronger. And here's where we need continued improvement. Like that's the key component that we need to not only as a board feel comfortable in the spending decisions we're having to make, but being able to communicate and justify that to our constituent member municipalities in order to inform them what, because we're sending our member municipalities a bill, so they're in all likelihood going to come back, well, what are we getting for that money? Show us the value, show us the benefit. Like that's the important part. And if I could, when I worked in highway construction, the Ministry of Transportation, in Mike Harris years, they laid off all the MTO inspection staff. All these control was a contractor responsibility. So I was part of that effort, and what we learned there was the contractors realized that yes, some of those MTO inspectors actually did do something. Some of them were working, some of them weren't, but our job was to figure out how to make that system efficient in a bid build environment. We had to figure out how to do that work, deliver the deliverables to the ministry that they wanted according to their specs, but do it in a timely and efficient and a safe manner. So I see the same parallels happening here. There's a great challenge, but there's a great opportunity at the same time. We just have to manage our way through the volume. That's all. Thanks.
Hope you forgive me if I get a little detailed, because so I have a couple questions mainly about the legislative changes, and because I might be undermining myself in terms of my previous statements about the importance of meeting timelines, but I've looked at our own specific examples that have come up in planning, and so two questions. When we largely our responsibilities have been reduced to simply risk assessment, and within risk assessment, qualifications around flooding lines, right? Which to a degree is also section 28. So I see these two as being very linked. But to my understanding, at least at this point, the section 28 requirements don't have statutory limits. Is that correct?
Regulated land. What is regulated?
And so the timelines for us to generate section 28 permits. So there are timelines for municipalities to generate development agreements. But if those come in conflict with the section 28 requirement, we don't have legislative timelines on section 28. And if a developer requires a section 28 permit, that is indefinite until the point where they meet their requirements under planning. Because the example where I'm familiar with, they are refusing to, or they have yet to participate in a floodplain study, which would then qualify the hazard limit and then define the section 28 setbacks. And then that's all at their expense because they have to pay for the flooding study, right? So that's why I ask about the timeline, because to a degree, we are and aren't really going to be held to these standards that the municipalities are. So that's why I say I'm undermining myself, because when I actually looked at it, conservation authorities aren't we aren't legislatively bound. And if we are concerned about good planning, there is not a mechanism for developers to supersede a planning decision that would actually provide a risk to a future resident or to existing residents. So I'm just on that point of Bill 23, I don't know if we necessarily have to change practices because our current practices work with the developers on the time that they define for themselves. And the second part is, in terms of hazard modeling, we have the mechanism to recuperate updated hazard modeling through our fees process, not keeping with inflation, but additionally, do we not already have up-to-date LiDAR maps that would provide that scoping?
So just to start there, and then I'll hand it off to staff. There are section 28 timelines. It's the planning applications that are less timeline bound. The municipalities have timelines. It's different on the CA, and that's why we're receiving funding and responding to the municipalities are saying you need to meet our timelines because otherwise there's serious consequences. So if there is a section 28 permit, we get a report, we have a report on the agenda on those timelines and if they were met. And staff, CO and have a tighter timeline than what the province is. Because they do believe that can be done. But when it comes to planning, that's something we've heard that we have $200,000 possibly coming from London to look at that, to make sure to see if those can be sped up to meet the requirements. Because there is a real risk of delaying, because those timelines were dropped so drastically by the province, there is a real risk of losing planning application fees and having those decisions. So that's why it is important. You're seeing that from London saying, okay, this is very important to us, we'll provide funding. I think the province isn't, but London is, because they see the importance of it. And then I can switch over to staff. When it comes to modeling, we have we're trying to update the modeling. I think staff is, we're seeing that there's a need to update modeling, but that may not meet the timelines of developers for a specific application. And so if they want to jump ahead or have that provided, see it happen all the time. If there's an EA or something that needs to be done, the municipality may have it scheduled for a year or two out, but if a developer wants it to happen now, we'll pay for it. It's worth the risk. So that's up to them to say to make a business decision, whether it would be in their best interest to be able to apply for that early and do the work and provide that, which is always welcome. If every landowner would do that, that would speed things up drastically. Or they can wait for the Upper Thames to be able to do that with the funding that's provided from our municipal partners. But it's certainly technical. We've had some conversations on that. I'll let staff answer the technical knowledge of, it's just not LiDAR, unfortunately.
Yeah, through the chair, when it comes to their mapping updates, the LiDAR is a great base layer, but LiDAR doesn't capture the cross sections below the water. And that's where a huge component of understanding the conveyance of water through channels is used to update our mapping. It's much more complicated than that, but just so you understand that, LiDAR is one part of a broader modeling tool. But I'm sure Chris will want to build on that a little bit, and Jenna as well can speak to the fact that with the Planning Act applications, it's not just the timelines for those and the meeting those timelines. It's the fact that we're trying to make sure that Section 28 comments about where those hazards are incorporated through that planning process. And with many municipalities shifting to more upfront pre-consultation, staff time that now our regulation staff are moving through that consultation staff as well as our planning staff. So a lot more time and effort is being spent. Pass it over to Chris and Jenna to elaborate on adding the modeling and then the planning processes.
Sure, yeah, no, Mr. Chair, if I could just elaborate a little bit on the LiDAR comment. So that gives us the base layer and helps us understand what's out there. It's not the whole picture, as Tracy was pointing out, but the modeling and the mapping, it goes beyond that. It's understanding the hydrology so that we understand the flows and understanding the hydraulics to know where the flood level is on that topography that the LiDAR defines. So that's only one piece of the puzzle, so to speak. I think that.
Sure, yeah, just to expand on what our chair said, so with this, the service agreement that the city has been engaging us in discussions on, one of the things that they're saying is, here are the timelines we're giving the Conservation Authority to review any application. And should you not meet those timelines and we don't receive any comments from you, we're going to proceed as if you don't have any comments. And so that's where the real risk is, because if that happens, then the municipality council is going to consider the application. The Conservation Authority's comments will be absent, even though we may have some very real concerns on that application. But council won't know that and may move forward with approving an application, which is in direct contradiction to our policies and what we can approve and permit at a section 28 level. So that's where the real challenge is, because some of those timelines are really quite tight, 2 weeks, 3 weeks on certain types of applications and submissions. And where a file is more complicated, where there's a number of hazards involved, there's technical studies, we've got to engage various staff members within the authority in undertaking those reviews. So not just our planners, but our technical staff, our engineers, our hydrogeologists, our section 28, our regulations officers are all having to undertake that review and then provide comments to the planner, who's going to pull all those comments together and then submit it to the municipality. So that is really challenging to do in a 2-week period, given the current staffing complement that we have. And all of the applications that we're seeing, just sort of the volumes of applications we're seeing. So it is a little bit scary to think that if we miss those deadlines, that the municipality is going to assume we don't have any concerns or comments, and may move forward with approvals where we may have some very valid and real concerns.
Just to follow up on that, I'm a little concerned about proper planning procedure if they're willing to forego information. And the outcome of that and the liability of such an issue. So I think it is very important that we take that very seriously and provide those, maybe something for London councillors to think about. If that's prudent operations to do in the name of planning fees.
Just one last follow-up. So are there restrictions on pre-consult fees? As I understand that, to shift towards pre-consult to have accelerated timelines, that schedule that has also been frozen, because that could be again a user pay mechanism. Likewise, if the City of London is willing to pay for or expedited service, is that not something that would in a way shift it to a category 3 program and allow municipalities to make the choice whether they want that higher level of service or not? Again, if there are issues with willingness to pay through municipalities, and I think the whole point we went through the categorization was to give municipalities more autonomy in terms of, or I'll say responsibility instead of autonomy, in terms of the billings that they receive from CAs. Would that not be an alternative mechanism to, tailor the cost to the preferences? Again, that you get 2 tiers of service, which is not necessarily a good thing. And what are the specific timelines for section 28 requirements? Because I get once it's submitted, then yeah, we would have obligations for response, but those submission timetables are up to the developer, and they may or may not actually be constrained, because like there are a lot of submissions right now, but there's also not a lot of construction in the residential sector because of high interest rates. So we're preparing for 2 years ago, everything was on fire, but now we have to jump how high for something that's not happening in reality. And that's why I wanted to dig in, because sometimes our assumptions don't match reality. And when we model, then we can come up with costs that may or may not be realized. And so thank you everyone for entertaining me in that exercise.
I'll touch on some of that.
Yeah, through the chair, I'll follow up. Certainly, what Jenna was mentioning, and having the development MOU and having these timelines, that discussion's still ongoing. Certainly, we'll have more information as the TMOU gets finalized. And be able to explore if there's any other opportunities for an enhanced level service agreement without the City of London. But again, past direction from the board has always been no, we want to be able to provide the service unilaterally to all of our municipal partners. The second comment about timelines in section 28 as it relates to planning, although the permitting requirements aren't required through our planning processes, the section 28, we still have a role in providing natural hazard comments as delegated from the province through our planning, commenting on local applications. So those timelines still would apply to us. Yes, we recognize that the permit often happens after the process at the end. And if we've been very involved in the planning process, it makes that permit process really easy for us. But that's where some of the challenges are. We're really trying to make sure that those hazards are best understood so that through the planning process, the principle of development is established, and where development is appropriate versus hazard lands where it's not appropriate, where we wouldn't be able to provide a permit down the road.
What about the pre-consult fees? And because that could be encompassed in a pre-consult, if the hazard assessment in a pre-consult, thus necessitating them to do the study and us not having to incur the cost of the on-the-ground verification of below water table topography.
Maybe Jenna would like to respond to, because we do have some pre-consult fees.
We do have some consultation fees built into our fee schedule. And then we also have our technical review fees separated out. So if there's associated technical studies that we do as part of the pre-consultation process, we can still charge that fee during that stage. We would charge that fee regardless of the stage application is in. There's a pre-consult or.
Those are also frozen.
But they are frozen.
They're
Yes, no, there's no.
Right, that was the question. Just to get perspective from the board perspective as well about previous decision, there was discussion about, well, Marcus was here, about raising fees for, to give London a higher level of service. I think it's very important that we're a watershed wide, and I think we don't want to start getting into multi-tier systems where people get to skip the line, because applications from around, what's good for one is good for all. And so that's why we need to make sure that we find a level of service. It's that's what we have three roles. We have oversight, as Dean's talked about. We have level of service, and we have policy decisions. That's what we do as a board, as councils. So that level of service needs to be done at a wide. I have no problem with London wanting to provide funding to be able to say, how can we all benefit from this? And we will. But I think that's a positive. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that no matter who puts their application in, it's going to get seen in the order that it comes in, and make sure that these are deadlines that we all are facing. There's just the pressures that we're, London's obviously seeing the most pressure as the largest municipality, and we're getting more applications from them as that easy to develop land has all been used up. And now you're seeing challenge lands become more and more of the applications. It's certainly not it's clear fields anymore. Those got used up during the pandemic quite easily. And as density and everything else happens, it's going to be harder and harder to get new land. So what you have okay. So just before we need to, I'll get to Paul here in a second, but I just we need to make a decision today. So I guess I would ask you to frame your questions or comments around if you can or can't support the draft budget going out. We're going to have a process. We're going to have this for a while. I love the discussion. I love the questions, and it all spurs stuff as we do stuff. So take the time, write those down, make sure you get them to staff so you get your answers. But today we got to make a decision whether we're going to get this out to municipalities as a draft budget or not, so we can get comment from them. So if there's further questions or comments about in that aspect of something you need to make sure that you can make an informed decision today, certainly. And then we'll work towards a vote. Paul, and then
Through the chairs, I want to thank staff for the responses to my earlier comments about hiring new staff, and And the assurance that once we get through this bump of extra work imposed by the provincial deadlines, that there will be an assessment of staffing levels going forward. And it certainly makes a lot of sense that if we're going to get full benefit of the work that's being done now and in the next 14 months, we do have to continue on with enhanced asset management, land use, and all those things. And that's going to require potentially extra staff, maybe not 10, maybe 5 or somewhere, whatever that number turns out to be. The challenge in future budgets, and not only this budget, is how do we pay for that, not only the increased level of service, but the increased level of staffing. And Christine has confirmed what we all know is we can't keep pulling out of reserves forever and ever, and we're almost at the limit of where we can do with reserves. Our opportunity to increase revenues is limited by fees freezing and how wide a branch, what we can charge the public to come into our parks and those sort of things. We do have opportunity to sell significant pieces of land, but we don't know what the province is going to let us do with the money that we get from that. Can we use it against operating? Do we use it against capital? Until we know that to me is a viable option, but it's up in the air. The other thing is, we got to increase municipal levies well above inflation. And if we do that and come in line with what other CAs have done over the years, where the municipal level more reflects of the level of service, then we have to make sure that we make the municipalities understand that, yeah, your levy is going up, but your level of service is going along with it. So to come back to what the chair just said, I am going to support this budget. At this point, I think staff have done an excellent job. I know that they're looking at a 3% pay increase, which is actually below what our township is going to do because of our policies based on CPI. And to get through, although I never like to see a deficit budget, we are allowed to do a deficit budget, and in the past, as the year went through, the deficit always got smaller as we got other revenues coming in. So I'm going to support it at this point when we come to a vote.
Tom and then Mark.
Yeah, I would support this that budget on the basis, just as the balloon trials, if we communicate to our members, see what they think, and then we have feedback when we go into pass the final budget. I think that's democratic. I would also like to see if there's a possibility of increasing revenue through judicious exercising of our existing fee schedule.
Mark.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, or I guess a question really on capital projects. There's 3 of them of kind of interest for Woodstock and the Piddock Conservation Area. One is sort of rebuilding and moving the gatehouse, which I understand why that has to be done. But the other 2 are more interesting is the washroom accessibility improvements and municipal water sanitary servicing. So obviously brought to the day use park area. That's going to be a certain upgrade and whatnot, but I was just wondering what percentage the authority has to pay versus what percentage the municipality be required to pay on any of these subjects. Because I thought, in my own opinion, that a lot of this was going to be covered by the municipality. Wrong.
Pass over to Bert to give the good news.
Yes, through the chair. The accessibility improvements, that's coming out of the AODA requirements for the province of Ontario. And so there's legislation that requires us to improve our services to meet all of those requirements in our reports, in our texts, in our websites, and on the ground within our facilities and our infrastructure. So that's addressing that need. The second point regarding the entrance. The city of Woodstock and city engineer just recently reached out late last week on Friday and to let us know that through city of Woodstock discussions, that project is being put on hold. They will not be funding that capital improvement for servicing Piddock Conservation Area. And so this well, in general, the land management agreement that we have with the city of Woodstock, any improvements to the entranceway from Piddock Park Road through to the UTRCA owned bridge over the CP rail, across the bridge, and then down to the bottom of the hill where it branches to go to the day use area into the campground. Any improvements to that entranceway are a split cost 50-50 from City of Woodstock and UTRCA. So there are a number of improvements that were factored into the municipal servicing work that were improvements and upgrades that are required to be undertaken on the actual bridge itself. That component will still be there, but as far as the servicing goes, the City of Woodstock had a major gap between the capital projects that were being proposed and the funding that was available. So this was one that did not make the list. Unfortunately, meeting with the City Parks Director, he doesn't anticipate it's going to be in the next 2 years. It could be 3, 4, 5 years away. So that doesn't solve the issue of our gatehouse being where it is, and the City of Woodstock's Parks Department desire to remove that gatehouse and put it somewhere else so that it's free and clear, unfettered access into Pittock Conservation Area with some parking improvements up there. So we will continue that discussion, see what that looks like. But as far as servicing goes, that from our perspective was really tying into future improvements to really streamline and create an efficient operation whereby we would have sanitary disposal, water hookup, and a gatehouse that could be a sole building that we could service and staff, as opposed to having a maintenance compound, a registration office, and a gatehouse. So there's certainly improvements that still could be sought. It's just kind of hitting the pause button on those plans and seeing where we can work with the City of Woodstock to see those benefits in future years.
So the washroom accessibility is as much as the washroom inside the campground. So
Yeah,
washroom.
the accessibility piece, that's not the City of Woodstock day use bathroom facility. So the servicing was phase 1. Phase 2 was and I don't want to speak for the City of Woodstock, but phase 2 included a new bathroom facility in the day use area and a new splash pad. So those projects are also put on hold, but the accessibility requirements here are with respect to the campground infrastructure. The City of Woodstock does not have a involvement with.
And you'll also note that there's no levy proposed for that piece.
Yes.
It'll be funded through the campground operations. So although the City of Woodstock may have some agreements for cost share in some of those aspects, for this part, there's no general levy proposed for those improvements.
Further comments? I'm gonna be supportive of sending the draft out. I think we have time. We have lots of great conversations. We've staff is fully prepared to ask questions of this. And we certainly need to do some explaining to our member municipalities, but we have to have something to explain to them. There's a lot of stories here that have happened that we're learning today and throughout the past and being reminded of. And so those need to be clearly articulated as well to our members in a way that they'll understand. We've heard a lot about reserves. We have a reserve policy discussion coming up. I think that's important. That will inform us what we can take out of reserves, if anything more, to offset things before we get to a critical point where we're in danger zone if we're not there already. So, but that's why we need a policy for that. Around capital, if we could have longer term funding at a higher level for those projects, that could help our municipality. St. Mary's right now is looking at a substantial increase in funding because of a project. I'm hoping that when we get an asset management policy, that will help maybe inform and maybe able to inform our members on how to possibly asset manage on their end for those things. It'd be difficult on our end to do that with the different changing in benefiting municipalities and what they're being asked for. But that information going out to municipalities, be able to inform to save that, so it's not a big hit on them when it comes budget time, is an item. And having that longer range funding available provides more certainty around that asset management plan. That's something we can communicate to the government as well, is that once we have this asset management plan, let's tie some long-term funding to that to be able to help us fund those needs that we know are going to come. One of the thing, I don't know what St. Mary's plans are for their share of that. It is significant, but I don't know if they can borrow. We don't want to borrow because it creates complications, but I don't know because it's for capital, but it's levy if they be able to. This fact, that's a legal question for them to answer, but that's always a possibility as well. when it comes to the drivers and what we're seeing, it's complicated. We're being asked to do way more. So we're not being asked, we're being told to do way more by legislation. That's about as heavy handed as you get. It certainly wasn't what we were after when we started this process. Who was on the board when it started? Yeah. Dean sent in a bunch of good questions, and a lot of them really realized how much stuff has happened and how new the board is, because when it came to even like the wage issue, I feel like we just did that yesterday. But it just wasn't, a lot of the members weren't here when we did that. And so we started off this process with the changes to Conservation Act. You know, nobody was consulted. There was just a letter from Minister UTRCA saying, wind down, one thing, it was wind down all services, category 3. And there was some pushback from municipalities about what we were doing and how we were funding things. But what there wasn't was a full understanding. And I think when we get through this process, there's going to be a full understanding of exactly what conservation authorities do. But there might be a full observation about maybe we were doing it better before. Because now we're seeing the consequences. This is the first year of the budget. These are the actions that came out of those decisions. It's been a long journey. You know, it's been one of those things that it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, it's real now. And that's a story we need to tell of that. It's better, and maybe it's something that the government has done, and I hope they're learning, is that if you ask for improvements, you may get a better answer than dictating results. And I think that shows with their timelines from Conservation Ontario around Section 28 permits. You know, we said, okay, we got to improve. Well, our timelines are tighter than the government's because we have a full understanding of the operations and what can be done and the issues. And so I'm hoping that I hope we're not met with hostility at our member municipalities. I hope we're met with curiosity and a collaborative method of how we can face these issues, because we're certainly open, I think, at the board level and at the authorities level, say, hey, these are real issues, these are real drivers, to fully explain ourselves about what these are and why these have to be done and what the drivers are behind them, and look at different ways. If there's, you know, I'm certainly open. I think everybody around the board is. If there's and staff, if there is room for collaboration that can save money and time, that's realistic. Yeah, why would we not pursue that? That would make a lot of sense. So I certainly support getting this out. It's a challenging budget year. Certainly, it's hard to put an average increase because the way you're changing it, and because the different municipal, how it's proportioned out, especially with the capital, it's all over the place. So it changes the story. But I think that with good communication, staff's preparing each individual municipality, we can get there. The budget may look the same, it may look very different time we get there, but make sure you keep those comments coming in and having those discussion. I think we need to be as transparent as possible in this process, because really the story is not us. It's really about the decisions others have made and how we have to react to them and the consequences of those. And unfortunately, it's going to be the ratepayers that have to pick up the tab, which is always the case.
Just going back to the point of a unified voice, I think if we just have unfreeze the fees, because that's the same thing here. All of us are facing with development charges. And I think it's not unreasonable to expect development to pay for development. And that's why it's going onto the backs of ratepayers and not developers. And I don't think that's fair. And I think our respective councils would understand that and hopefully pass that through on different lobbying opportunities.
And I was 100% surprised at that, because that was the message we got from the province, was charge more money, raise your fees. When it came back to, all of a sudden it went from, oh, cut every fund thing that's not category would be considered category 1 mandatory program. And then by the end of the process was like, no, do more of the other stuff to offset. But then you can't use that money to actually offset because of the way the program they came up. So they've made decisions that made it complicated, maybe hopefully through discussions and pressure from municipalities to say, hey, we actually preferred it the other way, to give us more options, to give the CA more options to offset our costs even more. Because a lot of times they were doing work that was happening in, and we support that work. And we support putting more costs on the people who are using the service instead of the general letter. Because I agree with you, user fees are a total equitable way of funding a project because the people using that service are paying for it, as opposed to everybody. And there's certain things that we all should pay for because we all benefit. If it's watershed wide, we should benefit from that. But a developer who stands to make a profit, and the people who are going to benefit from that, from living there or use the development, should probably pay those costs. Further comments before I want to thank everybody. This is great. This is what we want. Staff, I know a little bit at the beginning, I thought, oh, we're not going to have, but we need that. We need that discussion. It's important. If we have one thing a year, the budget is our major thing that we really need a strong decision, and one way or the other. I have a question. Should we be doing a weighted vote on this? No, none of the draft? Okay.
Our administrative bylaws only speak to
the final budget.
approval. or
Okay, the approval
consideration
budget.
of the-
Okay. So all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. He was late. He had to delay.
Oh.
Just to clarify, you were in favor? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. There's a delay on your end, so I just wanted to clarify. So it was unanimous. Thank you very much for the board for that. We'll have further business on that. If I could, just call like a 5-minute recess. Sure, everybody needs to get up and after that one, and we'll quickly get through the rest of the business. Okay, so we were successful in 6.1, so we will go to 6.2, and I will. Absolutely, and we'll hand that over to Tracy for comment.
Yeah, to the chair. As seen last month, was the position paper, a draft version. We've now had Grant provide legal review as well. So there's been a slight modification in the wording of the recommendation. Again, it really kind of allows that that for any constructed barriers such as weirs and dams should be considered for decommissioning. That language kind of provides that consideration step to then balance what those needs are and what the purpose of the structure is used for. And for staff to have that direction then to take on and go through those considerations for when we're decommissioning. With that, we have staff here to answer any questions.
Cindy,
Move the recommendation.
just before that, is there any questions of the report? Jim.
And I kind of understand remove the recommendation, et cetera. But could you give me a little bit of help on? I know for years that I think it was the Upper Thames position that even the dam in St. Mary's that was built when it was first constructed, which as far as the entire town thinks it's heritage. So if there were ever, where does that stand? Something like the St. Mary's Dam in this policy, because I do believe in certain instances like that, it really needs authorization from the council of the day in that community.
Yes, through the chair. I'll just comment, when it comes to municipal infrastructure like that, there's an EA process that would guide that and look at what the historical or cultural values are versus what the environmental impacts versus what the economic impacts are. So there is a process in place, whereas we also deal with private landowners that might have a dam or structure on their properties too. So this is to allow for kind of a broader statement that's supported by the board of directors, but then allows those considerations and those processes to flow through and consider each structure based on their merits.
You've answered my question. I'm fine now with that answer.
Further questions? See not, Sandy? Seconder? George? Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. And 6.3, Provincial Fences Act, Officer Designation at David Griffin. Tracy, any comments or staff?
Yes, sir. I'll pass it over to Jenna to give an introduction because we have Dave in the back corner here. You'd like to stand?
Sure, yeah, thanks. So we recently filled one of our regulation positions and unfortunately stolen from our park staff again. So Dave has already been appointed as a provincial offenses officer under section 29 of the Countries Authorities Act. And so this report is requesting board approval for Dave to be appointed as a POA under section 28 of the act. So he'll be assisting our City of London regulations officers with their roles and responsibilities. So supporting those officers with their files as well as handling minor and routine permits for the city.
Any questions? Anna, please.
Happy to move it and welcome.
Move by Anna for the recommendation, second by Tom. Discussion on the matter? None, all those in favor? Opposed? Welcome. Congratulations. Welcome again. And I'm assuming we'll perhaps have another recommendation to fill Fences office.
That's 29.
Yeah, that's 29, sorry. Okay. And now we will go to reports in camera. I'll ask for a motion to go into Paul, second by Dean. Discussion. Favor. Opposed, that is carried. I'll just ask that any staff are not needed to vacate. We'll let you know when back and we'll make the recommendation. Perfect. Welcome back. We're now back in open session. Consider the information and we have a mover for the recommendation. Give you information from Paul and seconded by Mark. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. We sound different, do you think? Perfect. We'll now continue with the rest of the agenda. Section 8, reports for information. We have administrative enforcement, section 28 status report. Any questions of that report? Seeing none, is there a mover to accept his information? Sandy, George for second. Oh, sorry, you have a second.
They also have
Okay.
a recommendation to go with that. I've been in discussion with Jenna about this and she's okay with it. And Michelle, I think you have the wording for it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, if you can read it.
So adding to the board records to report for information and an amendment that says, and that staff provide a review of violations that occurred in 2023 at the January Board of Directors meeting.
The reason being, there's a reference to the violations in the report. There's additional information, so I think it's important to get a regular update on what's going on with them. So hence the petition.
And the seconders, okay, perfect. Discussion on that. Mark.
Just, I guess, a question through to Jenna. I'm just really curious, in the city of London, the removal of unauthorized dwelling units. That was an infraction. Somebody actually building a house that wasn't a permit for that. To me, that's extremely excessive.
Yeah, and I don't, sorry, through whether Mike or Jessica are on the call. Speak to that one. Ben.
Through the chair, I'm wondering if the dwelling unit was a dwelling unit within inside a home as a secondary dwelling unit, but that was not authorized, not the complete removal of a dwelling unit.
You can always provide, have staff provide an update. for you on that one.
Yeah, happy to. Sorry, our section 28 officers usually join in, but it's always tricky after an in-camera session for them to know when it's not back on.
Maybe they can provide that afterwards, since it's extra information, and they can provide that information. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is carried. Next, we'll move down to project status updates. Is there any questions or comments on that document? It's good to see, track where we've been and where we're going. But I'm sure that will be added to it. And updated after the meeting. Is there a mover and seconder to receive that for information? Jim and Scotty. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. 8.3 watershed-based management strategy update. Anything that we'd like to highlight on that report?
Just through the chair, this is an initial update, so you can see what steps are in the process and what to expect as we move forward. Tara completed today. She is on jury duty. If there's any other questions, she'd be happy to answer them, but thought that it'd be beneficial for the board to kind of see that process in detail, since we've been talking so much about these deliverables. And again, noting that this is one of those deliverables that are part of that external consultation as well. So there's a couple opportunities highlighted in there where this will be going out for public engagement too.
Any comments or questions?
Question is this basically like a strategic plan, but a little bit different?
Through the chair, I think you could say there's a lot of parallels and it builds on strategic plan.
But that strategic plan is a component of it, but
Yes.
reading it, it sounded to me a lot like a strategic, a big picture
Yes.
strategic plan.
Mover and seconder to receive it. Anna? And Tom? Discussion? All those in favor? It's carried. And 8.4, the rental house rates. I think that's pretty much straightforward. Is there any questions of the report? See, is there a mover and a seconder? George, Scotty?
I'd like to see.
Discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. October, for your information report. Yeah, lots to see there and learn about. Any mover to receive that for information? Andy, seconder? Tom? Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. Committee updates. We have the Finance and Audit Committee. It's from September 26th meeting. Is there a mover? Is there questions of that report at all? Seeing none, Tom to move. Seconder for that, Paul. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will have a hearing committee following the break, so we'll skip over that. And then, is there any notice of motions? Seeing none. Chair's comments. I know people want to get out of here, so we'll be quick. You know, we've had a big year. We're now getting through a full year of getting close to a lot of members having at least a full year of experience on the board, and so that's a lot. There's been a lot thrown at people, so I appreciate everybody's work and comments on the budget, and we'll work through that process. It's a major one that sets the tone for the year and really sets what's going to happen over the next year. It's been a fast year, a lot of stuff thrown at you. What I try to do, personally myself, is go back and try to look at the minutes of every meeting that I've been part of, committees and stuff. Sometimes it's not always possible, but I encourage to do that just to have we've done a lot. There's been a lot of things happen. And so it's important just to get a refresh, because there's a lot of things that happen. I want to thank staff for their work on that. And as we switch seasons, as we can see out there, obviously, I can remember going to the first the orientation for the conservation authorities, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's over. That season's over. So of course, summer goes fast, and we go to a different season. being into another one. So I want to thank the board, and I hope everybody has a good holiday season. And if you're trick or treating, then I hope that goes well as well. Maybe next year, if we have a board meeting, we can dress up. Yeah, thanks everybody for support so far this year. I appreciated the board members. I know a lot of people are new, but I'm impressed with the amount of commitment and the amount of knowledge and stuff that people are sharing. So it's great that way. So we'll keep that up as well. Is there any members' comments? Seeing none, your members' comments.
Thank you, Brian. Just to continue on with Brian's comments, recognizing, wow, it's almost been a year since I met with many of you that is coming on, and I wanted to reach out again to say I'd like to schedule that again, to have one-on-one with all members. Either those of you that have been on a little bit longer, but and those of you that have just been on for the past year, we're getting your appointments. So certainly want to have that opportunity to have a discussion, see how things are going, and if there's anything that you want to provide feedback on, I'd like to hear it. So, in the interest of time.
Yeah, well, I'll call for adjournment then. Oh, thank you for adjourned. Audie, if we need a seconder, some we do, some we don't.
That's right.
Thank you. Made it, 2 minutes.
Vote on site.
Responses, I guess, for you.
In a Crowbar hotel.
That.
On to another meeting at 2:00. I'm jinxing you. To get home.